get down to the serious business of slurping, let me pass you over to my esteemed colleague, Callum, who's going to tell you a little bit about Nichols and Perks. Good evening, Callum.
Cheers, Tim. How you doing? You okay?
All right, thank you. Yes, it's it seems like Christmas was an awful long time ago.
Yeah, I was going to say, we've not seen much of you. You're obviously locked down, working from home.
Most of the time, yeah.
Hence the curtains, nice curtains.
Yeah, well, it's nothing personal, but I'm very choosy who I share my space-time continuum with.
Good, yeah. How did you get on Christmas and stuff like that? Because I know we were very busy up until
it was mad.
Christmas Eve.
It was mad busy right the way up until Christmas. So I think I was working all the hours that the Lord sends, but it was worth it. So it's nice to have a little bit of downtime. So that's good. So back in the swing of it now.
Cool. So hello everyone. Happy belated New Year to you all. My name's Callum Gardner and I'm a member of the Fine Wine team here at Nichols and Perks. Now, we've got quite a few new faces this evening. So before we begin, I'll just give you the obligatory introduction to the company that Tim and I work for. So located in Stourbridge, a small town in the West Midlands, Nichols and Perks are one of the oldest wine and spirit merchants in the UK and in fact the world, dating back to 1797 when William Nichols first began trading as a grocer, a druggist, and of course a wine and spirit merchant. Now, the company's been in my family since the mid-40s, 1945 to be exact, when it was purchased by my great-grandfather, William Gardner. There are now members of the third and fourth generations at the helm, with myself being a member of the fourth generation. Now, we're actually still located in the the original 16th century premises you see before you. Now, this was first leased by William Nichols for just 5 shillings per year. The building is now owned outright by the company and to this day holds our offices, a small retail shop and our famous 16th century cellars. If you've never been to visit, you won't regret it. Now, with regards to the business, there are a lot of different aspects and different layers to the business, but we are predominantly fine wine and spirit specialists with a keen focus on the wines of France, Italy, Spain, Portugal. However, we do offer wines from all over the world, and I'm proud to say that we exported to over 50 different countries worldwide last year alone. Now, as well as offering fine wine to private customers such as yourself and other members of the trade, we also supply the on-trade, so Michelin-star restaurants, for example, when they're open. We offer a fine wine investment program, offer wines as futures or en primeur, and we host over 100 different events these days every year. So that's enough about N&P. I'll pass you back to Tim, and he's going to, I think you're going to kick us off, Tim.
In a manner of speaking, thanks, Cal. So just before we actually start consuming wines, for those of you who've not been used to going to wine tastings, let's tell you a little bit about how you can get the best out of the glass. So I've called this tasting 1-2. Basically, what we want you to do is to swirl, sniff, and then slurp. The idea behind swirling wine in a glass is to let some of those volatile aromatic compounds that carry the aromas and the flavors, let them escape. And then you use your nose, because your tongue will only detect about 5 or 6 different broad flavors, but your nose connects to the olfactory bulb, which is a splendid database, sort of connecting your brain to your sinus. And that stores literally thousands and thousands of different aromas and flavors. And so that's why, if you were to try this at home, folks, put a piece of smoked salmon or something with a fairly strong flavor like that, pinch your nose, shut your mouth, you won't actually taste anything. But if you then just release your nostrils, the aromas of smoked salmon will then pervade your olfactory senses, and you will recognize it as such. So that's why you can't taste anything if you've got a bad cold, or dare I say it, coronavirus. Okay, so first of all, have a little slurp. Not too big a slurp, because what you want to do is to reset your palate, because each of the wines is quite different. And the other thing you want to do is to prepare your palate for a little bit of a food nibble, if you've got any of the suggestions that we put for you. It's not compulsory, but a little bit of food often helps the wine along very nicely. And you'll find that if you have a sip, assess the wine, have a little nibble of something, and then go back for another sip of the wine, the perception will change very slightly. And hopefully, if you've got a nice food match that works for you, the two things, the sum of the two things are greater than the individual component parts. So that's enough about that. Let's get on to wine number one. So this is a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. As you can see there, we've got a map of New Zealand. It's broadly two islands, North Island and South Island. We're concentrating in the Marlborough area, which is at the north of the South Island, and it produces about 3/4 of New Zealand's white wine, which is Sauvignon Blanc. The coastline is obviously quite important with New Zealand. The climate is fairly maritime. You've got the Pacific Ocean, which produces a lot of cooling effect there. So in summary, you've got a relatively cool climate. It's also got a lot of sunshine. So this creates what we call a large diurnal effect. That's the difference between the highest and the lowest temperature in the day. And that means you've got sunshine during the day, which helps the fruit grow on the vine. And then in the evening, when it cools down, that kind of slows the development down. So that makes the ripening a bit slower, and that ensures that the intensity of the flavor and the naturally high acidity is going to be preserved, which is what you want when you're producing nice Sauvignon Blanc. There's a few stats there. It's a comparatively newly recognized region, although New Zealand has been producing wine for a number of years. As far as the geographical indication is concerned, which is the set of rules that is agreed to show the boundaries of where the grapes are going to be grown, and to an extent what grapes can be grown and how they can be processed. For Marlborough, the region has been established just over 2.5 years. So it produces about 66,000 hectares worth of planting, which yields 300,000 tons of grapes. So it's in New Zealand terms fairly significant. Sauvignon Blanc has really taken off in New Zealand, and as you can see from this little graphic, over the past 15 to 20 years, well, not quite 20, the proportion of Sauvignon Blanc, which is the sandy color at the top here, looks like a cross-section of soil, actually, doesn't it? But it just represents by area the amount of different grape varieties that have been grown over the past years. And as you can see, Sauvignon Blanc is far and away the most popular. So on to the wine itself. I trust you've got a suitably cool sample in front of you. Have a little sniff. Now, the V Sauvignon Blanc, so it comes from the Marlborough region, and I think it's a really nicely produced wine. This is not desperately expensive, but a lot of kind of more bulk produced New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc tends to be just a little bit one-dimensional. This one, however, if you take a little sniff, there's quite a few different aromas going on there. And the things that you get are the slightly herbal nature. There's a bit of grassiness, gooseberry, citrus, those sort of flavors which you would expect to find in a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. But underneath that, you've got some tropical flavors as well, perhaps a bit of passion fruit, guava, things like that. It gives it quite a nice long finish, and it goes really well with goat's cheese. That's probably the most simple and yet one of the most effective pairings with Sauvignon Blanc. It's one of those things you can have a little glass of that, bit of goat's cheese, bit more wine to finish the cheese, bit more cheese to finish the wine, and that's a kind of well-balanced diet, isn't it, for a Friday night? So it's not just us who think this is a nice wine. Recently as last month, Decanter magazine said of this particular Sauvignon Blanc If you have a Sauvignon Blanc lover in the house, it's a great value option. It's not in your face with acidity or tropical sweetness, but has a soft palate of passion fruit, curd, fresh orange juice, and confit lemon. I'd agree with most of that, I think. Typically, this would be produced by fermenting in stainless steel. And there is a process with winemaking that's called malolactic fermentation. Now, initially, when wine is fermented, you produce malic acid. Malic acid is the sort of, describe it as being like slightly unripe apples. It's very, very crisp, slightly tart in taste and texture. Some winemakers, for certain varieties in particular, will often do a little conversion from malic to lactic acid, hence the term malolactic fermentation. And the change from the rather tart malic acid to the softer lactic acid gives a kind of more creamy mouthfeel and a slightly softer, more buttery taste. Cal will pick up on one of those later on, I think, with one of the other wines that we've got. But with this wine, it retains that real fresh, crisp flavour and texture. So I think that's a really good example at a very recent, very decent price. What do you think about that one, Cal?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So for me, it's a kind of, we talk about classic tasting, and that's why this wine is part of it. It's, you know, a typical Malbec Sauvignon, super fresh, a lot of energy, you know, and you know, you've got that kind of gooseberry and, dare I say it, cat pea kind of aroma, which is synonymous with Malbec Sauvignon. And you know, it is what it is, and a very good price as well to boot. So
yeah, it's just over £10, which is sort of really supermarket territory, and but it's much better, I think, than a typical supermarket wine. Mm-hmm. So one of the things about this part of New Zealand, which we referred to briefly, is that it's obviously fairly cool. It's surprisingly far away from Australia. You tend to think of New Zealand and Australia as being kind of almost like Dover to Calais, but it's not. So what I'd like to do is to have a little bit of fun and ask you a question. Which is further, Melbourne in Australia to Auckland in New Zealand, or Birmingham in the UK to Athens in Greece? So which do you think?
I think you gave him a tap in there too.
Okay, we've got most of you there. I'm going to count it down. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Well, 86% of you reckon it's further from Melbourne to Auckland than from Birmingham to Athens. And you're right. I'll give you a kind of easy one to start with. But in fact, the gap is not very much. It's 2,554 kilometers from Birmingham to Athens, and 2,627 from Melbourne to Australia. So 86% of you got that right. So well done. Right, after that light relief, I'll pass you back to Cal, who's going to go to Burgundy.
Yes, Tim. So second one in the evening is the 2017 Chablis Village from Domaine Fournion in Burgundy. So you'll see the map of Burgundy in front of you. So you have the Mâconnais, well, you have Beaujolais right in the very south. You have the Mâconnais, you have the Côte Chalonnais further north still, and then you have the Côte d'Or departments, again, a little bit further north. Then in the very northwest, you have Chablis, which is in the Auxerre district in France. Now, the climate in Chablis is what we call a cool continental climate with fairly warm summers, but very cold winters. It's what's known as a marginal climate, as the region is so northerly and so cool that grapes just about ripen fully in each vintage. Now, wine's been made in Chablis and in Burgundy for thousands of years, but it's actually the monks and monasteries of the Roman Catholic Church during the early Middle Ages and onwards that shaped Chablis in the Burgundy region as we know today. Now, The church were extensive owners of Burgundy vineyards, and it was the church that first recognised that different vineyard plots consistently created different wines. Now, this is ultimately the reason for different sub-regions, villages, communes, climats, or vineyards in Chablis. Now, Burgundy and specifically Chablis is regarded as the region that produced the finest Chardonnay grapes in the world. Now, I've previously mentioned that the wines from Burgundy are so sought after that prices for the very best wines have gone through the roof. Now, to put that into context with regards to Chablis, I recently sold a couple of bottles of the 2017 Chablis Le Clos Grand Cru from Domaine Ravenot for £700 a bottle. That's before taxes. So, you know, very high price. Now, despite extremely high prices at the top, there really is some excellent value to be had in Chablis, and hopefully I'm going to be proving that to you in a moment. Now, in a second, you'll see a map of Chablis. There you go. And within this region, there is a 4-tier classification system. So you have Petit Chablis, Chablis Village, Chablis Premier Cru, and Chablis Grand Cru. Now, the Petit Chablis wines, these are made from areas in the yellow on the map. And the Chardonnay grown here is from the so-called lesser vineyard sites. Chablis Village, or straight Chablis, is made from vineyards located in the pale pink areas of the map. And the Chardonnay grapes of this wine we're tasting now come from this kind of appellation. Premier Cru Chablis vineyards are located in the darker pink, and the Grand Cru vineyards, which are the very best in Chablis, are from that kind of purple block you'll see just north of the village of Chablis. Now, you'll actually see a river that runs straight through this region, and this is called the River Seran. And this river is very important to the region as it helps moderate heat, both when it's too hot, but also when it's too cold. And what this does is aid the ripening of the grapes, which is extremely important when it comes to the final wine. So we'll go on to the next slide. So yeah, another very important factor in Chablis is the region's soils. Now, the soil here is comprised of Kimmeridge clay with outcrops of the same chalk layer extends from Sancerre up to the White Cliffs of Dover. Now, the origin of Kimmeridgian soil dates back 160 million years ago, back to the Upper Jurassic Age. And this is when the sea withdrew, and what was left was the Kimmeridgian soil. And it's this soil that gives Chablis its unique saline mineral characteristics, which I'm sure you're all picking up in the wine now. Let's give it a bit of a nose. So you get that kind of mineral, even saline freshness on the nose. So we'll talk about the producer of the wine. The producer of this wine is Domaine Fournion, and Nichols and Perks have been working with Domaine Fournion for a couple of years now, but the domain actually dates back over 200 years. The domain is still family owned and holds around 23 hectares of Chardonnay vines in Chablis, which is just over 55 hectares. And interestingly, they actually only bottle 10% of their own production, so remain relatively unknown. The other 90% is actually sold to maisons or negotiants who bottle under their own label. There's the bottle shot. So let's give it a taste.
It's perfectly okay to make that slurping noise, by the way. It's not
perfectly normal. Yeah. I do that throughout the day. There's no wine about that. Now, the vintage, let's go to the vintage of the wine. It's 2017. And despite the freezing temperatures in April and spring frost, should we go to the next slide, Tim?
Mm.
Yeah. So yeah, despite freezing temperatures in April and actual spring frosts, and around a third reduction in the crop of this vintage, it's actually a fantastic vintage for white Burgundy and for Chablis. Ultimately, the weather conditions created a supreme balance between phenolic ripeness, which is the ripeness in the stems, pips and skins, and also the sugar ripeness, which are the breaking down of the acids and the accumulation of sugar. And you know, this is what every winemaker dreams of in every vintage. Now, with regards to the winemaking of the wine, grapes are hand harvested, they're brought to the winery, they're pressed, and the juice that comes, which it's created or released, is called the free run juice. This is placed into stainless steel vats where it undergoes an alcoholic fermentation with the addition of yeast. Now, usually, as Tim alluded to previously with the Marlborough, with Chardonnay wines anyway, is a malolactic fermentation. Now, this is the natural conversion of malic acid, as he said, into lactic acid, which gives an extra kind of richness and body to the wine. However, in this wine, in this Chardonnay, malolactic fermentation is prevented, and the reason for doing this is to give an extra kind of freshness, extra acidity, extra zip, which works really well with the minerality which is present in the wine due to those Kimmeridgian soils that I mentioned earlier. So after the alcoholic fermentation, the wine is racked into stainless steel vats where it undergoes about 12 months maturation, and thereafter is fine, filtered, bottled, and ready for the markets. Let's give it a proper taste, Tim. So for me, this is a perfect expression of a village Chablis or straight Chablis. I think the nose offers loads of citrus, quite a lot of stone fruit actually, in that complex mineral saline character, which of course is synonymous with the region. The palate, super fresh, super intense, impressively so actually. Plenty of citrus again, then that saline minerality that I keep banging on about, that comes through on the finish really well, and it's really quite long. For me, the power and quality of the 2017 vintage really comes through in this wine. I think it's really good balance, kind of effortless, harmonious, and a very good price for me, under £20. So I think it's a quintessential Chablis and perfect for a classic region, classic expression tasting. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm impressed. I'm impressed with this one. I think it's got the. I mean, if you tasted this blind, you could easily class that like a Premier Cru. It's got a lot more complexity, I think, and a lot more, a lot longer finish than some basic Chablis, which can be a little bit overpriced. But this one, I think, is bang on for the money. Really, really good. Yeah. Interestingly, we're talking about the weather in 2017, and that is a picture there of vineyards in Chablis, and it looks like they're growing icicles, or they've got icicles hanging out to dry. It's a really chilly area when the frost comes in. So I'm just going to ask another little question now. Basically, there are a number of methods that the wine growers of Chablis use, because frost is a perennial problem. 2017 was a particularly bad or good example, depending on which way you look at it. So what I'd like to know is, which method of the following is not used to fight frost in Chablis? Covering the vines with thermoprotective fabric, spraying water on the vines, using heated wires along the vines, burning straw bales at night, or igniting pots of flammable gel. Which of those is not used to fight frost in Chablis? You're thinking about this, I can tell.
More of a tricky one, this one too.
Oh, it's yeah.
You're back to your evil questions.
Back to my evil, devious nature. Yeah. Okay. Well, we've got. Okay, I'm going to count it down now. 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's stop and share. Well, those of you who expressed an opinion thought that you don't spray water on the vines, or certainly don't use heated wires along the vines. Well, actually, because I'm a devious chap, all of those methods are used. In fact, the one that was comparatively recently introduced was the covering the vines with thermoprotective fabric. That was stopped a while back because the local regulators thought it lowered the tone of the place and it didn't look good. But they are allowed to use those again now. Spraying water onto the vines actually sounds a bit counterintuitive, but if you look at the physics of it, spraying water onto the vines means that the ice will form around the vines and the developing flowers and berries, and that prevents an even colder snap of wildly sub-zero temperatures, giving it frostbite. Using heated wires along the vines, yes, there are some vineyards that have run cables along the vines and will run some electrical current to try and keep some warmth in there. Burning straw bales at night is not very carbon friendly, but it produces just enough heat sometimes, although that's not used as much as it used to be. One of the most common methods now is lighting pots of flammable gel, and I shall show you what that looks like. There, that was taken also in 2017, and that shows it's not a those of you who've seen The Wicker Man, it's not a strange collection of druids, nor a march for Donald Trump. These are actually little pots that you can probably just about see. They've got a flammable gel there, and you can imagine the labour intensity of doing that and going and lighting them all by hand at night and doing the same thing for several days on the trot when there is really a terrible cold snap. So there, yes, I'm a cheat. Sorry, Natalie and Julie, but you know, I make no apologies. Well, if Donald Trump doesn't apologise, why should I? Okay, I think we better move on to the next one now. I see some of you are posting up what your food matches are, so that's good. I see somebody's had some oysters and some gouda.
Nice.
It really does change the perception, I think, and brings the best out of both the wine and the food. So I hope you've all got some nice nibbles to enjoy. Okay, so now we're going to South Africa to show you a map of the region, and let's just enlarge this little area there. So you can see this is the south coast. There we've got the Cape there and the various different regions. Paarl is this area that's shaded red. It's one of the most famous regions for producing wine in South Africa. It's located about 60 kilometers, just under 40 miles inland from Cape Town, and north of Stellenbosch, which is the other well-known region. So the variety of grapes that are grown there: Cabernet Sauvignon, Shiraz, Chenin Blanc, and Chardonnay for the red and whites. Today we're looking at Pinotage, and these are all significant grape varieties, but Pinotage is probably one of the most important and well-known classic ones from this region. They tend to produce fairly rich and robust red wines with a great intensity of fruit. So the actual Pinotage grape itself is a blend, effectively, of Pinot Noir and Cinsault, which is otherwise called Hermitage in South Africa, hence the portmanteau of Pinotage. The climate there is fairly hot compared to the more coastal areas of the Western Cape. So you've got long hot summers and fairly cold and sometimes quite rainy winters. Rainfall for this area is moderate to high, but the heat of the vineyards means that over the summer months you still need some irrigation to help cool the plants. The Atlantic Ocean, as I said, is about 60 kilometers away, so it's got a little bit of influence, but much less than the real coastal areas. So Paarl itself has got a long history of wine production, starting off in the later 17th century with the French Huguenots, who began to settle there as a small trading outpost, and they planted vines and indeed orchards. So Pinotage, as I said, is a signature grape of South Africa. it covers a kind of multitude of sins, because you've got a lot of relatively low quality table wines to really good quality, rich and concentrated wines. And this is hopefully the way that we're going with this one tonight. Lots of sort of dark fruits, red fruits, bit of spice and chocolate, things like that. So the variety is actually discovered in the 1920s and was first pressed into commercial use in the late 1940s. So although it's a reasonably hardy variety, which it needs to be with that climate, Pinot Noir itself is a bit fickle, and that's thanks to the Pinot Noir part of its genetic makeup. Pinot Noir can be quite fussy about both its terroir and the wine-making technique. So you need to know what you're doing as a winemaker, which hopefully these guys do. So let's have a look here now at the Fairview cellar. That was established also in the late 17th century. It's got a spectacular view, which you can see there, of Table Mountain. It lies on the southwestern slopes of Hull, and the current owner is the third generation. His grandfather actually purchased the winery in 1937. So one of the interesting things that we come across quite frequently with the winemakers is some sort of generational hand down of the know-how, some sort of continuity, and that's very important, because a lot of people will struggle to learn everything in one generation, because every year something different occurs, and with the benefit of history and knowledge running over sometimes many generations, there's always some resource there which can be used to understand better what is going on in the winemaking territory. So this particular one has got an alcohol level of 14%, so it's got a reasonable kind of kick to it. It was harvested from both older vines and also from younger vines. And the reason for that is that older vines have much lower yields, but have much more concentrated flavors. And the vines themselves will dig a lot deeper the older they are, particularly if, as in this area, the soil is fairly inhospitable. Again, perhaps counterintuitively, you don't want particularly fertile soil to grow successful vines. You need to treat them mean to keep them keen. So if a vine has to really dig down deep to get its nutrients, it's A, going to be a stronger vine, and B, is going to produce more concentrated flavour, albeit at a lower yield. But this is also balanced in this case with younger vines, which have slightly more kind of youthful taste to them, if that's an apt description, slightly fresher, more fruity flavours. So the blend of the two really is what we're doing here to produce the wines. Because it's Southern Hemisphere, the harvest date was between the last sort of week or 10 days of January. The grapes are picked over a number of days by hand, and that ensures you get the perfect maturity of each block. The bunches are then destalked and lightly crushed before being fermented in stainless steel tanks and open top oak sort of vats, basically. Malolactic fermentation did take place with this. So the wines then spent 10 months in French and American oak barrels, about 15% of which was new. The rationale for that is just to pick that apart. French oak and American oak has got slightly different characteristics. So again, winemakers will use quite often a mixture of the two types of oak to lend the different characteristics that they're looking for. If you use too much new oak, however, that can impart a rather overwhelming set of flavors and influences on the wine. So it's usual to use some oak barrels that have been previously used a number of times, so that although you've got the effect of the micro-oxygenation, because oak is porous and it will gently allow wines to partially oxidize in a controlled and sought after way. This helps to soften the tannins and improve and enhance different layers of flavors. So just giving a kind of twist of about 15% new oak, as they've done in this case, will just lift the flavors of a little bit of vanilla and cinnamon, which you can hopefully detect as you continue to swirl and sniff and sip. So the tasting notes from the winemaker, bright red ruby color, it certainly is. And on the nose, you've got some a little bit of violets there at the sort of floral end, and then nice plum aromas with little bits of chocolate. It's got quite a full-bodied palate, I think. Let's give it a proper sip. This process of kind of slurping with your mouth very slightly open is to draw some air into your mouth, and that helps to aerate the wine and open up those flavors a little more quickly. So I think this is quite subtle. Great with anything barbecued. There's a very slight smokiness there as well, I think. So barbecued, I suggested things like smoked duck, pulled pork, slow cooked meat, sausages, kebabs, charred vegetables, pizza. It's a bit much for one meal, but you get the idea. What do you think about this one, Cal?
Yeah, I think it's good. Fairly relaxed, quite juicy. Plenty going on. Very good, and yeah, I think very well suited to the barbecue food, which we know they love down there in South Africa.
So somebody's asked, why does a deeper vine get a more concentrated flavor? It's a function of age, really. So as a vine ages, it will be continually digging down and down. So an older vine produces a lower yield. A lower yield, however, concentrates the flavor. So I hope that kind of answers that one. Now, I'm going to ask Cal now about the goats. So Cal, you've been there, haven't you?
Yeah, well, I noticed Kate mentioned that she'd been there around Paarl and around that area, and I have as well. It's an awesome place, and we actually visited the Fairview domain, or whatever you want to call it. We're actually walking around. There actually are goats just walking around, and we've got a little section for goat yoga, so you can have goats climbing all over you if that's your thing. So it's quite a cool place, definitely.
Excellent. They actually do they've got another variety or another label, which amazingly enough is called Goats Do Roam. I think there's a very corny pun in there somewhere. But before we pass on to the next one, Cal, I have another, not an evil question. This is a much more gentle question. So there we go. Paarl Mountain takes its name from the Dutch word for pearl because of the way it glistens after rainfall. Is that true or false? Right, I shall count down again. 3, 2, 1. And, well, 71% of you think that is true. And you're right. I told you that would be a more gentle question. Paarl Mountain does indeed glisten like pearls after there's been rainfall. So, from Goats Do Roam to Côte du Rhône. Boom.
Yes. Cheers, Tim. Yep. So the next one of the evening, guys, is the 2016 Côte du Rhône La Tamardière from Domaine Saint-Laurent in the Rhône Valley. Now you'll see the map, the entire Rhône Valley in front of you, and this is located in the southwest of France. Now you have the northern Rhône, obviously the north, which is home to the famous appellations of Côte-Rôtie, Condrieu, Saint-Joseph, Hermitage, and Cornas. And then you have the southern Rhone, which is home to appellations such as Gigondas, Lirac, and of course Châteauneuf-du-Pape. Now, the climate of the Rhone is a Mediterranean climate with low yearly rainfall and high sunshine levels, especially during the summer and into the harvest months. Also, the famous Mistral wind from the north plays a significant role, a significant cooling role, and actually blows on average 180 days of the year. Now, this climate allows a range of grape varieties to express their full personality. Thus, red varieties such as Grenache, Syrah, Mourvèdre, and Sanso thrive here. I will point out that white varieties do as well, but that's for completely different tasting. Now, with regards to the history of the Côte de Rhône, Côte de Rhône is actually among the oldest vineyard regions on the planet. Greeks, Romans, and the medieval popes had a real soft spot for the native grape, rocky soil taste, and today it's a region that is really, really highly revered, one of the most in the world, in fact. Now, the soils here, they're comprised of sand, clay, but mostly of stone, rocks, and also pebbles, which are known as galets. Now, these kind of big, larger pebbles act as heat conductors, which in turn aids the ripening of the grapes grown here. So, very important. Now, within Côte de Rhône, you have 4 quality levels. So you have Côte de Rhône AOC, or appellation Côte de Rhône. Now, this appellation lets winemakers choose from 21 different grape varieties, so quite a lot, with the wines mostly being comprised of red blends. Interestingly, this appellation accounts for 60% of the whole entire production in the Rhône Valley, so north and south. So after Côte de Rhône AOC, you have Côte de Rhône Village. Now, this appellation includes 95 different villages that can fall under this appellation, and the wines are slightly more complex and tend to have a slightly higher alcohol due to the better sites aiding the ripening of the grapes. The next classification is Côte de Rhône Village plus the name of said village. Here there are 20 different villages permitted, and there is a strict process that producers have to go through to make the grade of this appellation. Again, there's a slight step up in quality. Finally, you have Cru Côte de Rhône, so the very best vineyard sites, for example, Châteauneuf-du-Pape in the southern Rhône or Hermitage in the northern Rhône. Now, the classification of the wine we're tasting now is actually Côte de Rhône Village, and the grapes are actually sourced from the area just north of Châteauneuf-du-Pape. You see that on the map, Tim?
Yeah, I'll just show you that again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's right. So it's directly north of the Châteauneuf-du-Pape. So the Châteauneuf-du-Pape in red, that's right, just in that orange bit. So essentially this wine, you know, it's very much a baby Châteauneuf-du-Pape, but without the price tag. Now, if we go on to the producer slide, Tim. So the producer of this wine is Domaine Saint Laurent, and Nichols and Perks have been working with Domaine Saint Laurent for a couple of years now. But the domain actually dates back as far as the early 1900s, when Francois Sinard began investing in vineyards in the southern Rhône. Today, 4th generation family member Robert Henri Sinard and 5th generation member Laurent Sinard are now at the helm, and there you see them. Now, these guys, their primary objective is to develop great wines through the uniqueness of each particular vintage. And they do this by using cultivation practices that allow the terroir to express its true character. Now, Domaine Saint Laurent, that they see the earth, nature, and the stars as a massive influence on the quality of their wine, and so follow biodynamic winemaking practices. You'll also be interested to know that the name La Tamardière refers to a little shed that's located in one of the Grenache vineyards. So that's why this cuvée is called La Tamardière. Now, the vintage of this wine is 2016. And 2016, it's an excellent vintage in the Rhône Valley, and more specifically the southern Rhône, where all the grapes for this wine are from. It's actually even better than the critically acclaimed 2015 vintage, in fact. Now, you'll see a quote in a moment from Matt Walls, and he's a journalist for Decanter magazine. So he says, "I've tasted nearly 1,500 wines from the 2016 vintage, and it's clear that it's a very good year in the northern Rhône, and truly great in the southern Rhône." So there you go, Tim, a great vintage. So with regards to the kind of weather conditions, it was a fairly early start to the growing cycle, but due to cool and dry conditions, the ripening was gradual, which is exactly what you want. Summer was very dry throughout, with just an occasional shower, and this helped to ward off hydric stress. August was very sunny, very hot, and the heat continued into September until welcomed rains, cooler temperatures, and that arrived on around 15th of September. Now, the picking for the reds started on the 12th and continued into early October, and those who waited until after the rain had several weeks of warm, dry weather on hand, so producers could wait for optimum ripeness of the grapes for each parcel and each variety, and essentially picking when they wished, which again is what winemakers dream of. All in all, 2016 gave ideal growing conditions for the winemakers of the Southern Rhone, both in quality and also quantities being very high. Now, interestingly, Côte de Rhone, which appellation Côte de Rhone Village, which is the appellation of this wine, they must be made of at least 50% Grenache and also a minimum of 20% Syrah and or Mourvèdre. Interestingly, the final blend of this wine is 70% Grenache, 25% Mourvèdre, and 5% Syrah. Now, with regards to the winemaking of this wine, the grapes are manually harvested, they're brought to the winery, they're always destemmed, placed into stainless steel vats, where it undergoes a maceration and alcoholic fermentation that can last up to 20 days. So, quite a long time. This is a very important stage in the winemaking process. It's when tannins and anthocyanins or colour are extracted out of the skins. It also marks the beginning of aroma and flavour profile development that essentially shapes the final wine. So, a crucial stage. So once this maceration alcoholic fermentation is complete, the malolactic fermentation occurs, which we talked about at length, and then the wine's aged for 12 months in oak barriques, or each individual grape is aged 12 months in oak barrique. Once this is complete, the wines are blended to different